IDCA to Infinity Paradigm and Beyond podcast, where we bring the most recognized faces and thought leaders of the technology industry and have candid discussions on industry topics that are top of mind for IT professionals. This time, I'm joined by Jothi Dugar, CISO for NIH Center for Information Technology. Jothi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and on a daily basis? I mean, CISO, I'm sure keeps you relatively busy, but outside of that, or including that, what's your day-to-day life like? What are you involved in?
Sure, I'd be glad to answer that. So I do believe in a well-rounded approach to pretty much anything, to your life, to your work, to your health. And I'm really passionate about looking at everything using that holistic approach. So I am a CISO at the NIH Center for Information Technology, or shortened term is CIT. But in addition to that, I'm also a holistic wellness practitioner. I have my own wellness practice where I help people really heal themselves naturally through alternative remedies and therapies, and just using a whole mind, body, energy connection and approach. I also have a dance company where I teach anywhere from 3-year-olds all the way up to grandmothers and over 60, and all of them actually perform at major events like NBA halftime shows, and where I also factor in health and wellness into the dance and performing arts, and building their confidence in themselves. I'm getting ready to start writing a book on just my whole approach to things, including cybersecurity. So really, I do believe in doing what you love, and loving what you do is what really fulfills you in life.
That's outstanding. I mean, I have to admit to being a little bit awestruck by the amount you have going on in your day-to-day life. I'm guessing people don't call you when they want to get updates on Game of Thrones or other TV shows.
That's funny. I forgot. You know what? I totally forgot to mention that I have 3 kids. This is probably the first time I forgot them. So sorry, kids, if you're listening. But I do have 3 kids, ages almost 3, almost 6, and a 9-year-old. So I try my best to be a role model for their generation, and keep them inspired and motivated. And really, having 2 girls and 1 boy, I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing and giving back to the world, and setting that generation up for success in areas where I didn't have good role models or mentors. I want to be there for them.
That's outstanding. I mean, and so taking it from there, and thank you again for all of that awe-inspiring and inspiring background and work ethic and life ethic, for that matter. And that kind of takes us into, how we came to have you on the show in the first place is, at least in my experience, kind of a relatively unique way of thinking about a combination of life and what I oftentimes refer to as a systems approach, but what a health oriented person might think of as a whole body approach to how you think about life and work and your job. And so I'm excited to get into that conversation with you.
Yes, likewise, me too.
So, you obviously, from that intro, have a very varied background and a lot of different loves in your life. From cybersecurity to dance and health, among other things, as well as your children. Tell us, with all of that, how you came to be in the CISO role.
Sure. So it always takes someone to notice or observe certain qualities in others, and especially in women, to really encourage them and drive them into fields like cybersecurity, which is even to this day, it's still predominantly male dominated. So back in 2005, I was working for DoD, and I had a great manager who I was still doing technical. I was always technical, but that's the year that my previous manager really saw some potential in me, and as a fast learner, and told me that, hey, there's this cybersecurity field that's starting to pick up. Maybe you should look into that and try it out, and we can send you to training and see what you think. So me being the person I am, I started doing some research into it, like, what is this field? What is it all about? And I didn't quite like what I saw. I did see that it was predominantly male dominated, seemed a little scary at first. I really didn't think that was my cup of tea. But you know what? I said, okay, well, it's, training can never hurt anyone, so let me go ahead and do it. And I loved the training that I took. And I really never just stopped after that. I got into the field, I got some projects, did some hands-on learning, and I thought, okay, maybe I'll do it for a couple years and maybe branch out from there. But I stuck with it since then. It's just such a large field that many don't recognize exactly how big the field is. So it's great because you could do so many different things in the field and really never get bored. So that's how I started. And then I realized, I do love working with people. I've always been, a leader in everything that I try to do. So I thought, I saw that there was a technical route you could take in cybersecurity, or you could, take a management and leadership route. And that really appealed to me more so than being purely technical. So I started looking into, what do I need to do to what's the path? And what I noticed was, unlike other fields such as medicine or law and being a lawyer, there was no clear path in cybersecurity, which is good and bad. Mostly good, since there was no clear path. There wasn't any right or wrong way to do things, or like a step by step. You have to pass this or you have to pass that. So I just started experimenting with different areas within cybersecurity, and I think just by doing that and really using the other aspects of my personality is really what I needed to get a CISO type of role. And what I mean by that is if you only have technical skills, it'll take you to certain areas in life. But, in order to be a good manager or a good leader, or especially in cybersecurity, you really need the communications skills. You need project management skills, organizational skills, the ability to relate to others, and also just soft skills like, empathy, and being empathetic to the situation that others are experiencing, and be able to relate to their role, not just tell them what you want out of it. So that's really what I was learning a lot of, and how to do that effectively, which really led to my position today.
Well, that's outstanding. And I mean, there's a lot of good advice, and a lot in there that even though I'm not directly associated with the field of cybersecurity, that rings true for what I've seen as well. I mean, when I was first worrying about security from an infrastructure leadership role or a CIO role, the function of security was very much a few people focused on some very siloed areas of opportunity to try to wall off, right? And I think that's been determined over the years as being the wrong way to approach security. But it's like heavily involved with things like what to put on a client, and what to do at the firewall, et cetera. And the role of CISO wasn't even defined yet. So I think that function and that opportunity, as you found out, is obviously a growing space, and highly critical that we continue to expand on it. So appreciate the good work there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And so, moving on to, thinking about the whole, right? You obviously believe that that's important for everyone. Thinking about the whole, either the whole body, the whole human, or the work environment. How does this life view help you in your role as a CISO?
Sure. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So I always go back to the example of westernized healthcare. So in the Western hemisphere, unless you're a functional or integrative or holistic natural doctor, usually a patient goes in, they have a certain symptom, have a headache or something, and then you go to a doctor, they give you some sort of medication for your headache. Now you take too much medication, you end up with an ulcer. Then you go to the doctor for the ulcer, you'll get some other medication to fix that. And then little by little, things, you'll start having more symptoms and you'll get more medicines. And there really isn't too often they don't take a root cause analysis, like, well, what really caused the first symptom to begin with? Why were we getting headaches? And looking at a person from a mind, body, and energy perspective. Did you have some emotional trauma that's causing physical symptoms? Maybe we should resolve the emotional trauma using other means first. So if you bring that perspective into cybersecurity, it kind of works the same way. Organizations have a certain symptom of a problem. Let's say too many vulnerabilities. Usually then somebody will throw a tool at it, or, oh, hey, let's get this tool to fix our vulnerability problem. Then you realize, like, oh, it's not really a vulnerability problem, it's an asset management problem. Oh, okay, then let's get this other tool to fix that. And little by little, more symptoms will come to the surface and more tools are kind of thrown at those symptoms without really looking at things from a whole point of view. And what do I mean by that? So if your users or your system owners or even your leadership, like you said, security is often looked at as just the job of the security team or the CIOs or the technical staff. And that kind of worked back in the day when security wasn't really a thing, but now it's just that approach is not going to work. So we have to involve the entire community. You have to involve, your entire organization. All users play a part in security, and really getting them to understand their role in it is crucial. And also what are they getting out of it? So NIH, is a healthcare organization. So we do have an actual hospital here. How are you going to go to a clinician and explain their role in cybersecurity and what role cybersecurity plays in, the role that they play in the mission? We're not just there to take your computer away from you or tell you what not to do or get you in trouble. It's really making the connection and even an emotional connection to cyber for that person. Okay, how would you feel if somebody had access to all of your scientific research or your patient care information and they leaked it to the cloud somewhere? Now all your 10 years worth of data is either missing or tampered with. Getting them to understand their part in it. And also making sure that you're not scaring people off, but you are making it realistic for them, and looking at all of your doing a root cause analysis. Like, why do we have these security issues here? Like, what is the root cause of them? And then what can we do to, from an integrated solutions point of view, not just throwing one tool at it, but look at, a lot of times what happens is there's a portion of one tool that people use, and then the rest of the tool just sits there. No one's really using that. Then you buy another tool and you use a portion of that. So we really need to look at even the tools from a holistic point of view. Like, what tools do we really need? How do we use as much of the tool as possible? How do they integrate with other tools? Is it just the tool that we need, or do we need processes in place to so that everyone knows what the right thing to do, promote those policies across the board, ensure that the CISO or the security office doesn't seem so foreign and isolated, like you were saying. If they're just some team that sits somewhere and the only time they approach users is when somebody did something wrong, then that's not really promoting a culture of cyber safety in the organization. So we really, as cybersecurity professionals, we have to make sure we're meeting with the people, we're meeting with different stakeholders, they know who we are, they're not afraid to call us. We're making ourselves more approachable to them, so we're promoting the idea of doing the right thing even when no one's watching. That's when you have a successful cybersecurity approach. If people are only doing the right thing when they know they're being watched, and they're just going to continue doing the wrong thing when they know they're not being watched, which that's just going to make everyone's lives harder.
That's a great point, and actually, I think a philosophy of my wife and I with raising our daughter, who's now beyond our ability to control on a daily basis at the age of 24. But when she was young, I think if I'm following what you're saying here, when she was young, we never told her not to do something because she would get in trouble or because the police would catch her, which was a common refrain when I was growing up. Don't
Right.
steal the mail out of the mailbox because that's a federal crime and you can get into big trouble. Instead, it seems like it's a better way to approach the problem by discussing just why it's wrong and just why you just shouldn't do it in the first place. And so
Yeah.
I appreciate that approach. And so I think, I know that we had a slightly different thought around our fourth or our third question. I want to modify it just a little bit because, everything you're talking about is very much in line with the idea of the IDCA infinity paradigm in looking at the whole system. But I wanted to change the question. I hope that's okay with you.
Sure.
And talk a little bit about something that you hinted at, and that's the approach to identifying tool sets that can help you have a holistic approach to looking at security, because some of the points you made are valid in other areas of IT as well, right? As a longtime infrastructure person, going back for way too many years, I might think of something like getting OpenView, and OpenView can do 101 things plus groom your cat for you.
Right.
But the average company didn't implement OpenView, or if they did implement OpenView, they bought a $200,000 tool and they spent $200,000 or $300,000 getting it installed, and then got the same benefit out of it that they got from putting 20 minutes into installing WhatsUp Gold, right? And
Right.
And so I imagine that same problem is very true as you described in security. So can you talk a little bit about, back up just a second. When I think of security, I think of I could easily, even as a non-security professional, I could think of 100 different places where a security tool might be appropriate. So how do you think about the environment as a whole and ensure that you're not duplicating effort, or that you have the appropriate tools to get the most, using the 80-20 rule, get the most bang for the buck, things like that?
Sure. Yeah. So again, I believe in there's a reason why in the people process technology connection, just like the mind body energy connection, why people are first. They are your biggest assets. There's a common miscommunication in the security world where they call people their weakest links. That could happen, but that just means that you haven't really driven the importance of cyber safety or cybersecurity in your organization. So I would look at that as, if you're considering people as their weakest links, then you just have to do a better job of in bringing the awareness to them. So I always look at people as our greatest assets. If you have, if you empower your people, like we said before, to do the right thing, know what the right thing is to do. A lot of times we look at people as like, oh, why did he do that? Like, why did he put everything in the cloud? Like, well, did they know the repercussions of that? Did they know they're not supposed to do that? Were they provided any training? Were they, are they aware of the risks of doing that? Most of the times they're not. And they're also, when we talk about insider threat and things like that, it's the most common thing is a misconfiguration of something, or someone that accidentally did something without realizing that they did something wrong. So again, I would focus on the people first, then it's processes. So do we have the right processes in place? Do people know what the right thing to do is and how to do it? Who to call when they don't know something? Do all the, are there enough standard operating procedures or policies, and are they well known and followed? Then comes the tools. So if we can't resolve something with just people and processes, then that's the areas that I would look at tools, because the tools also include people and processes as well. So that's why it's all connected. So when we start looking at tools, rather than looking at the symptoms, usually more often what happens is, like I said, you have a vulnerability, quote unquote, issue, you throw in a vulnerability tool to that. But the way I would look at it is okay, so what is causing these vulnerabilities? I know there could be vulnerabilities with a variety of different things, with software, with hardware, with applications, with websites, with coding. So again, it goes back to the people and processes. Are we, for the developers that are creating your applications or your databases, do they know the secure way of doing that to begin with? So you reduce the number of vulnerabilities. What type of tool do you really need? Do you need a static code analysis tool, or when do you want to catch it in the process as well? So I look at it. You mentioned a system approach before. So I look at things from a system lifecycle approach. So not, vulnerability tool is great, but it's almost like it's too late. If you already have a vulnerability, then your system is already there's a chance that it could be exploited. But why not try to resolve it from the beginning itself? So factoring in security and privacy reviews from the acquisition stage itself. Before you buy systems or solutions or tools or applications, factor in the security requirements as part of your acquisition process. Then, when you're about to implement that tool in your environment, again, you would involve the security requirements. Like, what do we need to do to implement that in our requirement? So there's, again, like there's two stages to that. So two stages where you could catch things. Then, you also want operations and maintenance. That's when the vulnerability really comes into play. Okay, so we've addressed the security when we bought it, we've addressed the security before we implemented it. Now, how do we address the security for ongoing operations and maintenance? And then the last stage would be disposition. When we're done using the system, how do we get rid of it? You can't just throw it away or give it back to the vendor. We factor in the privacy of the data or security of the data. What do we want to do with the data? Can we even give it back, or does it have to be? Does the whole system have to be DDoSed, or how do we basically sanitize the data before we give anything back? So again, like if we incorporate security through all the roles and organizations, top down, bottom up, all around, and we factor in security from a system lifecycle process, I think it'll become obvious where do we really need the tools, and why we need them, and also, what tools integrate with each other. So from my own health journey, it's not just from a holistic point of view that I started looking at healthcare, but it's also from an integrated point of view. there's usually hardly ever a time where one remedy or one therapy is really all you needed. It's usually an integrated solution. Maybe you needed 3 different therapies, and they, in conjunction with each other, it worked to solve your healing or your healthcare issues. So same way in cybersecurity, it might not be one tool or like the one part of the tool that you're using. You might have to look at different tools or different parts. Are you using the tool wisely and effectively? And how does that tool integrate with this other tool that you're planning to get? And do you really need all of these tools? Or is there a better, more integrated solution?
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I definitely appreciate that approach. And going back to even what you said earlier, I love the humanistic approach you take to it. I just want to reiterate that, because I think all too often when it comes to the human equation, whether it's the organizational structure or leadership style or reward systems or whatever, or talk of teamwork, talk of customer service, you name it. Too many of us treat it with platitudes as opposed to making it really making it part of our day-to-day work. And so I really appreciate how you've incorporated that into your strategy for leadership and for running security. So
thank you.
Not that you need my approval, but great job.
No, it's always helpful to see that it's helping others. It's not just preaching to the choir.
Absolutely. So, we're getting close to wrapping up, and I just wanted to ask one more question. I've had the unpleasant duty of doing some of the old style security work. Unpleasant, not in the sense that I didn't enjoy the work, I actually did, and the team members that helped me with it, but similar to doing disaster recovery and avoidance activities. Sometimes they were the things that, because they were the risk was amorphous, and the risk was held up against existing opportunity in other areas. It was always problematic to get things approved. Can you give the listeners some thoughts on what you've done with leadership and the team as a whole to help get things done that are important for the organization?
Sure. I mean, cybersecurity is always one of those areas where it is hard to show the value of it and also show the risk of not doing it. So I think taking a more relatable approach, and I'm not saying you should make this an emotional connection, but usually when you make a emotional connection to anything, you do get more involved in it, and then you also tend to understand really the need for it. So what do I mean by that? So if you're a CISO or a cybersecurity professional and you just go to your supervisor, whoever that may be, whether it's a CIO or a director, and you just say, oh, I need some more money for my cybersecurity program because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. And most of the time the answer is going to be no, or okay, well, they might not understand why it's really needed. So what I found best was telling a story, and that's where the communications perspective comes in. Really tell the story as if you're actually in the story yourself. So why, what's the strategic approach to this? So, here's the here's a risk management approach to it. Here's the risks that the organization, you always have to tie it back to the organization. This isn't about you. It's not personal. A lot of people tend to take, a disapproval or if you get an answer that you weren't expecting as something personal, but it really isn't. And I would suggest not approaching it that way as well. Really tying it back to the mission of the organization, how to, what's the value that whatever you're proposing in your cyber program is adding to the organization, and talk about what are the risks of not doing that, and really in a language that resonates with the person you're speaking to. So if you're speaking to a CFO, you do have to factor in, budgets and funding, and put it in terms of money. Like, how much money are you saving the organization by investing in cyber solutions? And what would happen if you didn't invest in cyber solutions? How much money would you lose at the end of the day if you were to be compromised? And when you're speaking to a COO or a CIO, putting in a language that they resonate with. Okay, so, too often, as we talked about earlier, cyber is regarded as a roadblock or something that slows down operations. Okay, that's one way of looking at it, but what if we change the perspective on that? Tell the story in a different way. So, if you didn't factor in cybersecurity into your operations, then you would basically find out after the fact that something is insecure, or you might not even find out at all. And if you were to be compromised, you wouldn't even really know where to start. Versus if you had to factor in security to begin with, then you will, it might take a little bit longer to get to the final destination, but at least it's going to get there, and it's going to get there safely and securely, so that for the long term, it's less risk, or you minimize the risk. And a lot of people, I'm sure you could relate to this from a data center perspective, don't really remember that availability is also part of your security triad.
Absolutely.
So people often relate security to like integrity or confidentiality, and they kind of forget about the availability part.
Yep.
So that's key in who you're telling the story to. So from a CIO or COO or even a director position, they're always like, okay, I need the system to go live by this date. I'm like, okay, that's great, but if you don't factor in the security in that, then anything could happen. Somebody else might get access to it, and then now you're available, and they can shut down the system. So, the security triad being confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I think the availability, it's like the red hair child. It always gets somewhat missed or not really correlated to security.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's a great set of answers, and certainly jives with my experience, where it matches. And I certainly can see why you've been successful, and you've one of the things that a lot of us have been able to do recently is get some exposure to government employees in situations where we normally wouldn't. And I just want to say, as a concerned citizen, it's heartening to see more evidence, similar to the evidence we saw in Congress recently, that some of our government employees, including you, Jothi, are doing some great work for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And so, folks, with that, I'd like to say thank you for Jothi joining us today. I thought her feedback on security was fantastic. I hope you enjoy it as well. Jothi, thank you again for joining. And for those of you who might be interested in participating in a future podcast, please send me an email at podcast@idc-a.org. If you'd like to find me online somewhere and follow what I'm worried about, you can find me on LinkedIn under Mark Thiele, or at mtlee10 on Twitter. And Jothi, where can people find you if they want to look you up?
Sure, I'm on LinkedIn as well, or my website, www.jothidugar.com. That's JOTHIDUGAR.com.
Great. Thank you again for joining, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.
Thank you so much.